All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Public Safety, Transportation, and the Environment Subcommittee. We are going to begin, I think we're just going to go in order as they were listed. We're going to begin with the Subsequent Injury Fund and ask our analyst, Micah Richards, to go through the analysis with us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Micah Richards, and thank you to the chair, committee, and the citizens of the great state of Maryland for allowing me to speak before you today. I am presenting the Subsequent Injury Fund, referred to as SIF Fiscal 27 Budget Analysis. Starting on page 1, SIF Fiscal 27 budget increases by $2,529 to $3.6 million. On page 2, Exhibit 1, 82% of the Fiscal 27 allowance supports personnel. On page 3, Exhibit 2, personnel expenses decreased by $26,955 in Fiscal 27 compared to Fiscal 26. On page 5, Exhibit 3, the assessments collected increased by 3.4% in Fiscal 25 compared to Fiscal 24, and SIF's fund balance continues to increase. On page 6, Exhibit 4, the closing fund balance for Fiscal 25 was $140.5 million. On page 7, Exhibit 5, the average cost per claim in Fiscal 25 increased by 23% compared to Fiscal 24. On page 8, DLS requests for SIF to concur with the governor's allowance. On page 9, in the most recent audit report, SIF had 0 findings. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Are there any questions? All right, thank you very much for that analysis, and we will move and ask Mr. Edgar Dodd to please come up.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Edgar Dodd. I am the Director of the Maryland Subsequent Injury Fund, and I'm pleased to be joined at the table today with our Fiscal Services Administrator, Mrs. Rose Hunt, and an accountant in our fiscal unit, Mr. Ken Riot. It's a good day to be working at the Maryland Subsequent Injury Fund. I'm proud to say that things are going very well. I'd like to thank Micah for his astute analysis of the program. And I would also like to acknowledge Micah's availability to us throughout the year with any questions we have about the budget formulation. And we also are fortunate to be joined today by Miss Sandy Henderson. Sandy is our DBM and budget analyst, and she is very helpful throughout the year. The one thing, I submitted written testimony, and I will not read that testimony to you. I just want to repeat one thing that Mr. Richards mentioned. The latest audit that we had, we had 0 findings. And that is something that we're very proud of. It's a credit to the 2 people sitting here beside me and the other men and women at the Maryland Subsequent Injury Fund that work every day to serve injured Maryland workers. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? So as co-chair of the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, I appreciate that also. I have a quick question, just that this actuarial study is on time to be completed by March?
Actually, it has just been completed. And one of the recommendations that the actuary made was that our current 6.5% assessment rate continue through at least 2030, which will be the next scheduled audit.
Great. All right. I don't think there are any questions. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Micah Richards again, and we'll go to the Uninsured Employers Fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm presenting the Uninsured Employers Fund, referred to as UEF's Fiscal 27 Budget Analysis. Starting on page 1, the fiscal 27 budget increases by 1.5% to $6.1 million compared to fiscal 26 appropriation. On page 2, Exhibit 1, 57% of the fiscal 27 allowance supports the third-party administrator referred to as TPA. The TPA is Corvell, and UEF contracts with a TPA for the TPA to manage UEF's claims functions. On page 4 and 5, Exhibit 3, in fiscal 25, the cost per claim decreased by 27.4% compared to fiscal 24 due to a significant increase in the number of resolved cases. On pages 5 and 6, the amount of benefit payments in fiscal 25 decreased by 10.2% due to the TPA increasing the share of claims in which another party is responsible for payment. On pages 6 through 9, Exhibit 5, in fiscal 24, the expenditure exceeded the revenue by $1.8 million. In fiscal 25, the revenue exceeded the expenditure by around $160,000 due to a lapse in the contract between UEF and the TPA from July to October 2024, resulting in UEF not having to make payments to the TPA for the 4-month period. The TPA current contract is from October 2024 through October 2029. According to the Department of Budget and Management, the estimated expenditure by the close of fiscal 26 is expected to exceed revenues by $1.8 million. Exhibit 6 shows the cost of the TPA are the main cause of the expenditure exceeding the revenue. During the 2025 session, DLS projected that UEF would become insolvent by the close of fiscal 27. However, DLS now projects that UEF will remain solvent through fiscal 27 due to the revenue exceeding the expenditure in fiscal 25. Exhibit 7 shows the estimated fiscal 27 fund balance will close at $1.7 million. Due to the current financial situation, it is projected that UEF will become insolvent sometime during fiscal 28 unless UEF receives additional revenue or has lower expenditures to ensure UEF's solvency after fiscal 27. On page 10, DLS recommends to restrict $100,000 of UEF's funds in fiscal 27 until UEF submits a report documenting whether a third-party administrator is needed for the entire current 5-year contract and their staffing capacity to manage claims functions in-house due to the report not being submitted per the request from the 2025 Joint Chairman's Report. Page 13 details that in the most recent audit report, UEF has 3 findings. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? All right. We will ask Mr. Andrew Anderson, Acting Executive Director, to please come up. Do we have anyone here from the Uninsured Employers Fund? Okay. Okay, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Saran Taylor, and I am the Accounts Fiscal Technician 2 for the UEF.
Do you have a presentation to make to us?
I do have a statement for Mr. Anderson. The first area of operation concerns is the cost of the UEF's third-party administrator. In 2014, the director recognized issues with the claim functions and hired a private contractor to assist, and throughout 2014, additional individuals were added to assist the contractor. In August 2015, due to the untimely death of the director, Mr. Anderson was appointed the acting director from September 2015 until November 2016. Also 2016, due to the claims contractor's inability to perform satisfactorily, their services were subsequently terminated in 2017. During this period, the agency's goals shifted to bring the claims functions in-house. The committee was set up, positions were advertised, and about 150 resumes received, and approximately 20 claimants were interviewed. The committee was comprised of in-house worker compensation attorneys, staff, and himself. Applicants' backgrounds were verified, but none posed relevant experience in the workers' compensation field, and no offers were extended. Subsequently, based on WCC's recommendations to hire a third-party administrator, and while considering new employees' costs, trainings, and computer system requirements, the agency decided to solicit bids from established TPAs. The Board of Public Works approved an emergency procurement contract in or in about 2017, which ultimately resulted in the current contract with our TPA. The second area of operation concerns were the UEF's assessment rate of 2%, which has been stagnant since about 2009. In 2016, a letter was sent to the legislator through DLS requesting an assessment rate increase of 4%. DLS agreed with the request, however, responses to the increase were not received. The UEF is a 100% self-funded agency, and the current 2% assessment rate is inadequate. The agency does not have the funds to continue paying claims without an increase till about 4% to 4.5%. And that's what I have.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Because I have a bunch. And I don't want to put you on the spot because you are the messenger. Do we know if Mr. Anderson is okay?
He was unable to make it in person, but he didn't get a link for the Senate hearing for today, and he was
Okay, 'cause
unable
we
to get
don't-
in yesterday.
Yeah, we can't do both.
Right.
Okay. Do you have any insight? Can you tell me a little bit about your role? I don't want to put you in a bad position.
Well, as my role, I basically take care of accounts payable, accounts receivables in the office, and as well as the assessments that go out. I do have someone that can speak on the TPA version of the information that we have
Those are my
here with us
questions.
today.
Well, and also if anybody has any insight into the piece of legislation that was put forward last year that was vetoed?
I do not.
Anybody have any insight into that?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So one of the bills was Senate Bill 219, and was also House Bill 193. So that was passed by the House and Senate to increase the assessment from 2% to 2.5% to increase UEF's revenue. And then there was another bill, Senate Bill 227, and that was to make the fund a party to a claim filed against an uninsured employer and to alter requirements for the reimbursement of awards, payments of awards, and notice of claims. And both of those bills were vetoed.
Do we know why?
So it was vetoed by the governor, so the governor's office in the letter stated it was vetoed due to the situations that happened in the past. It was with the increasing the assessment, the stakeholders, who are paying the assessment, which are the insurance entities, did not want to pay that increase. And for the other bill, Senate Bill 227, part of that bill was to have the Workers' Compensation Commission to hire an overseer to oversee UEF's functions in-house, to evaluate their capacity to handle some of the claims functions in-house. And so due to something in the past, they said it was something of impropriety. They did not want WCC to make that decision of who the overseer should be. So that was the reason stated in the letter.
Okay, that's helpful. Yes.
I served on the workers last year.
Okay, maybe you can shed a little more light here.
I'll give you the short version. Tremendous conflict between workers' comp and the uninsured workers' fund.
Okay.
Like tremendous conflict. And we tried to pass legislation. It was in finance and someplace in the House, those two pieces of legislation to try to work it out. But just as he said, there was so much conflict that everybody kept fighting. That's essentially what went on.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. I also, can anyone shed any light on when we can expect the joint chairman's report? That was requested last year, taking a look at the cost-benefit analysis, among other things, of having these functions performed in-house rather than the money-sucking, the third-party administrator, which is blowing these costs out of the water. Do we know when we can expect that report?
I can relay that back to the acting executive director.
Okay.
And see if he has.
Right, that would be helpful, and also just be aware that one of the recommendations of the Department of Legislative Services is to withhold money until we get that report.
Correct.
So I just want that to be clear. I think we need a lot of work here, and I'd be happy to hear more because.
Madam Chair, I might be able to shed a little light. My name is David Stash. I'm the principal counsel for the uninsured employees fund.
You want to have a seat?
Yeah, I want to be real careful because I'm not authorized by my Office of Attorney General to actually testify. But I do want to bring your attention that there was legislation passed last year to appoint a new board for the UEF. My understanding is 4 or 5 position has been appointed, but there's been no contact yet, and the new board will appoint a permanent director. The current director is an acting director.
Okay.
There's a prior director after conflict preference here, and the new legislation passed in the board retired effective October 1st.
Okay, so there are
that's where
some
we are.
changes afoot, and.
Right, and again, my understanding 4 to 5 board positions have been filled. We're waiting for a 5th position. At that point, once you have a new board, the board appoints a director.
Okay.
And I think that has to be happen first, and then at that point, somebody can get you an answer when a JCR response.
Okay.
Forthcoming.
This seems to me to take on some measure of urgency because of its
agree.
solvency. So
Madam
I just
Chair-
want to put that out there.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair, I'm with the third-party administrator. I
Okay.
can shed some light on the report and at least information from,
Briefly.
private third
Briefly.
party. I will be as briefly as I possibly can. Mr. Richards' report is extremely thorough, but it's not incorrect, but it's inaccurate.
Can you give your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Michael Schaefer, and I am the current claims manager for Corval, and I oversee the UEF account for Corval. Being as brief as I can, if you look at page 2 of Mr. Richards' report, it indicates that Corval's spending per the total spend for the UEF is $3.5 million, and it accounts for 57% of the spend of the UEF. And now, if you look at page 7, it indicates that the contract, which was approved, delayed, and then eventually, approved, is $1.4 million a year. And that is the third-party administrator's cost to the UEF, is the $1.4 million a year. It was a little higher before this contract went into effect on November the 1st. And to give kind of a brief example, nothing against Mr. Richards, because looking at raw data at this, real brief example, an injured worker needs a prosthetic leg. It's $20,000. Well, Corval's handling the claim because of our managed care division, because of PPOs, et cetera, we could get that for $18,000. Now, when the injured worker gets their prosthetic leg and the bill comes in, the bill charge is from Corval Corporation. But Corval Corporation isn't collecting that $18,000. It's going to the provider for the prosthetic leg. There's a lot of that with bill review, other durable medical equipment, everything medically involved, where Corval will step in, provide a savings, and then the UEF will pay Corval, who will in turn pay whatever medical vendors there are. I think that is the difference between the $3.5 million and the $1.4 million. The $1.4 million that, that's being charged now for the claims services for the third-party administrator services represents 22.9% of the total spend for the UEF according to Chart 2. So again, if I'm Mr. Richards, I'm just looking at data, looking how many checks are coming into Corvell Corporation and adding them up. That's what I'm going to come up with. But even if it's taken in-house, you will either pay $20,000 for that hypothetical prosthetic leg, or you'll need to hire some entity to provide medical management services and cut expenses. So
I think that's the kind of information we would want to know and hope would be included as part of this report. Exactly. Did you want to comment on that?
Yes, so the 3.5 million, so that page 2, that data comes, all this data comes from the Department of Budget and Management. So this is the proposed allowance, and that we at DLS have projected that 3.5 million is proposed for the third-party administrator. The 1.4 million that's stated and on page 7, that is what UEF noted that they plan to pay Corvell in fiscal 26 and fiscal 27. So part of this situation, as going back to the work group from last year, the Workers' Compensation Commission was put in charge of reviewing a lot of the data and information from the agency, and they expressed that they did not receive all of the reports that they had requested to go through all the information and data. So that's what's the reason why of having an overseer, so we can get all of the reports and data to do a thorough evaluation. So according to WCC and DLS, we are seeking to have all of the updated data information to thoroughly evaluate the full situation of how much is being paid to the third party and how much are the expenses elsewhere. Now, majority of the expenses goes to the claim payments, which are required by state. So the state has to, because those are the payments to the injured workers based on the verdicts from the judges from the WCC.
Okay, that's helpful. Any other questions? Senator Sullivan?
Chair, we could just maybe have a follow-up, because I think we're kind of looking at, I mean, they need to fill the rest of the board, they need to, and I guess the important thing is just following up on all the rest of the information when it comes to be.
Sounds like a possibility for some narrative.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think we can do that, certainly follow up in the interim. Yeah, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, that concludes that hearing, and we will move on to the Department of Natural Resources, and Andrew Gray, our analyst, will go through that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Fiscal 2027 Operating Budget Analysis. On page 1, you see the budget increases by $19.2 million, or 4.4%, to $455.8 million. We'll jump right into the Managing for Results exhibit. This is on page 8. This first one concerns Maryland State Park visitors and capacity closures. So before the pandemic, we were seeing a ramp up in visitors, but then a spike during the pandemic, which has now come down. People are, I guess, finding other recreational activities or spreading out their kind of interests. But we are seeing it kind of leveling off, still at a higher level of visitors than we're seeing before the pandemic. And also we're seeing a positive trend here in terms of the capacity closures are decreasing. As you see, between 24 and 2025 in the exhibit, the capacity closures have been reduced from 158 to 131. DNR is engaging upon a day-use reservation system process that appears to be working. At least some of the parks that have been piloted so far, indications are that they've eliminated the capacity closures. DLS recommends that DNR comment on its plans for the overall use of the expansion of that day-use reservation system, whether the new system is changing access, public access in any way. Second amendment for our results or exhibit is on next page. Here is page 10. Exhibit 2 shows the winter dredge survey crab population statistics. A lot of lines here. The thing to focus on is that the crab population overall still seems to be going down. which is a concern. The females look to be pretty good. The breeding female population is increasing somewhat, but we're still seeing a decline in the male population. Obviously, you need both. So the question is, what exactly is going on with that overall population? So DNR has kind of looked at this to kind of, the Chesapeake Bay program's Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee in particular is really digging into this. The report was expected at the end of kind of March 2026 time period. We're in March. DNR should comment on the status of that assessment, any preliminary findings, and attendant population or potential blue crab management considerations due to the considerations about the overall decline in the population, certainly with the males too, for the crab population. Striped bass information is on page 12 there is Exhibit 3. And slight increase in the overall population of striped bass, good sign. We're still looking better than we did back in a very difficult period where the average biomass of the females was down very, very low. So we're much higher than that level. However, there are still kind of ongoing considerations about the population, and we are changing kind of the dynamic of how we're looking at them in terms of managing them, just to make sure that the juveniles have a better chance of survival. One of the concerns here is that they get stressed during the summer, and that means that if there's harvest and release or catch and release, those juveniles might actually perish. So the idea is to kind of give them a break in August so that they have a chance to grow up to be big fish. Federal rescissions are discussed on page 13. This information concerns two components: the oyster funding, so the Department of Commerce's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration alerted DNR that there would be a reduction of the final year of a 4-year agreement on oyster production from tributaries, the Scale Habitat Restoration Project. So as a reduction from $800,000 to $449,000. DNR was able to backfill that funding with general obligation bond funding from its oyster restoration program. And my understanding is that any leftover funding, the $815,000 that's being used to backfill, is more than $449,000, for instance. And that money will then be available for the Herring Bay Sanctuary to do some work there. In terms of the second rescission, the AmeriCorps funding was cut for nearly $400 million in funding overall on April 25th, 2025. Lawsuits came about during the period in which there were concerns. DNR was able to use funding from the Forester Park Reserve Funds to be able to fund the AmeriCorps program. There was a graduation, and now my understanding is that that there's additional funding Department of Service and Civic and Innovation has discovered and we're kind of using to fund that program in fiscal 2026. In terms of the status of legislative additions, on the bottom of page 13, see there's an addition of $200,000 in general funds for the Deep Creek Lake Mechanical Harvester Program. So going out there and pulling out the weeds. DLS recommends that DNR comment on the status of that work. Proposed efficiency is noted on page 14. There's a $500,000 swap that's going on for the Natural Resources Police. So they're using State Boat Act funds, special funds, to replace general funds. And there's a second increase of $750,000 for the Summers Cove Marina Improvement Fund to fund the management of the arena. We'll talking more a little bit about that as an issue in a second. Moving now to Exhibit 4 on page 15. This shows the overall complement of funding for DNR in the fiscal 2027 allowance. So just highlight here, the Watershed and Climate Services is the largest program DNR has. The primary funding is $73.7 million for grants. That's usually Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. And you also have the Maryland Park Service, which is a close second there, and is primary fundings for regular positions and also for contracts in the Maryland State Parks. The budget is Exhibit 5 on page 17. Note some of the large increases here under the personnel expenses. A certain amount of the personnel expense increase is related to some of the contract work or the labor agreements in the SLEOLA, on the Natural Resources Police. There's also some increases there for the Power Plant Assessment Program, do the additional work that they need to do, and some of the other programs as well. And there's also a change in turnover, which increases the amount of funding, a reduction in turnover, which increases the amount of funding that's available to the DNR. Under Natural Resources Police policy grants, or Natural Resources Policy Grants, excuse me, $6.3 million increase for the whole Watershed Restoration Partnership grants and monitoring expenses. So that's actually a double count in a sense, because that reflects the money that's being spent out of the fund. So there's Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund money going into the account, which is shown in the budget, and then there's also spending out of the account. So unfortunately, that's the way it has to be shown in order to show both of those components, but does show a $6.3 million increase between the 2 years. $1.25 million of that is from the Waterway Improvement Fund. Then there's a $12.7 million decrease for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund. We talked a little bit more about that in the Chesapeake Bay overview. Some large decreases there for the major information technology development projects in terms of their status and kind of where they are in development. There's a $3.0 million power plant assessment program technical contract increase. And we'll talk a little bit more about their overall workload and the kind of costs that they are seeing need. On page 18, I'll just highlight one part there is the Maryland Park Service funding primarily for new or expanded parks. The $3.2 million kind of will highlight as an issue in this analysis, a lot of work being done in the parks, a lot of exciting things opening up this year, this calendar year. In terms of the BRFA provisions on page 20, the Maryland Park Service operating costs. So the Maryland Park Service is supported in last couple of years by the Program Open Space State Land Acquisition Funding. And that funding is authorized to support POS, certainly in fiscal 2026 and onwards, if there's at least an $80 million balance in the Program Open Space State Land Acquisition Fund. So DNR is clarifying that the Heritage Conservation Fund, one of the components of funding that they receive, is part of the money that can be attributable to that fund, the POS State Land Acquisition Balance in the fund, which then allows for money, more money basically to support operations. Power Plant Assessment Program is being authorized funding from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. So this provides funding for one of its programs, the environmental review, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. There are two other sub-programs that are already receiving $5 million in the allowance based on the assumption by the administration that that money was already eligible to be used by the Power Plant Assessment Program. But my understanding is they're going to be bringing in a Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act amendment to be actually able to address that, all three sub-programs. And then in terms of personnel, on page 21, you see there are 12 regular position increase and 41 contractual decrease in the allowance. DNR also did have 34 positions abolished, of which 9 were vacant and 25 were due to the voluntary separation program as part of the October 2025 Board of Public Works actions. In terms of the overall positions, there's 7 new positions, 5 in the Power Plant Assessment Program, and 2 in the Natural Resources Police, 5 in the Natural Resources, or the Power Plant Assessment Program to do the additional work based on those kind of utility scale solar energy projects we'll talk about in a second. And then 7 contractual conversions across the agency and an additional 2 abolished positions. And the turnover is decreased from 10.6% in the working appropriation to 7.55%, which means that there's more money for personnel expenses in fiscal 2027. Moving now to the first issue. This concerns on page 23. This concerns the Maryland Park Service and the excitement about all the opening of the additional parks, which is very, very, very cool. I'd be interested in checking them out myself. Exhibit 6 reflects all of that activity, the $3.2 million budgeted in fiscal 2027 for that purpose. A new park, the first state park in Wicomico County with Tipton Creek State Park, and also Freedman State Historical Park, which is part of the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, seeing funding and opening. However, this is sort of overshadowed perhaps by the idea that there's not a kind of sustainable long-term funding stream for the Maryland Park Service, which we've talked about over a number of years. There's $12.6 million in Program Open Space State Land Acquisition balance funding that's supporting the Maryland Park Service. They're not, in a sense, kind of supporting themselves and the Program Open Space state allocation that comes out of the allocation they get from the transfer tax. The original allocation is insufficient. And of course, the transfer tax does fluctuate from year to year, and it's not a great kind of in terms of a sustainable source of funding. One park that is not mentioned in this information here is the Gwynns Falls State Park, Partnership Park. The Department of Natural Resources did submit a report based on kind of a work group, kind of group meetings have been talking about kind of what the park would need. The overall costs reflected for that park are about $7 million to $18 million in terms of the capital costs, and operating costs around $2.8 million. So substantial need without any money necessarily in the budget. It really depends on when that kind of will be triggered in terms of the actual moving forward on that park. DLS recommends that DNR comment on what the long-term plan is for the funding of those 6 new parks and all its parks based on the fact that there are some challenges, and also the Gwynns Falls Leakin Park is a state historic park. And then also to comment on the status of setting up affiliated foundations and the potential revenue or in-kind offsets, cost offsets they might represent in terms of helping to support the Maryland Park Service. Then on page 25, the Power Plant Assessment Program is discussed. So some challenges in the Power Plant Assessment Program. Let's turn really briefly here to Exhibit 7 on page 27. So this is the kind of history back to 2011 in terms of where they were, where they are now. So what you're seeing way back when they had the purple bar, that's just Environmental Trust Fund, electricity surcharge, and our residential electricity bills. So that was stable for a fair amount of time. You did see a slight decrease in the projects through kind of around the mid-2020s, but that's probably not indicative of the overall complexity of the projects, the amount of kind of legal work that is associated with them. But then since around 2023, you've seen a substantial increase in the project interest and submissions. That's power plants, that's transmission lines. A lot of this is the, once again, the utility scale electric solar energy projects. So what you're seeing in the fiscal 2027 allowance is that around $5.7 million of Strategic Energy Investment Fund funding, the red bar at the very top there, and also, once again, that increase in the overall project load. So that funding, as we discussed briefly before, would support three components of the Power Plant Assessment Program on page 25, the general direction, impact assessment, and environmental review. General direction and impact assessment already are directly involved in certificates of public convenience and necessity work. Therefore, the administration assumed that they would be eligible for Strategic Energy Investment Fund funding. The environmental review component actually looks at permits of all different types. I actually did not know that the scope of the permits they were looking at in terms of like the Bay Bridge and all sorts of other things. Fascinating. But the idea being that that program in particular was not necessarily going to be eligible for the use of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. That's why the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act provision is in there to expand the fund to be able to use it for that particular purpose. But now the administration wants to really make clear that all three programs are going to be provided for within that Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act provision to make sure that it's absolutely everything's above board in terms of the money is being used for that particular purpose. DLS recommends that DNR comment on the long-term funding plan for the Power Plant Assessment Program, what the roles of the following should play in the program's funding structure, including application, certificate of public convenience and necessity application fees, increase in the environmental surcharge perhaps, and also just kind of other considerations in order to make sure that that program is fully balanced in terms of its funding needs going forward. Issue number 2 concerns the information, or actually issue number 3, excuse me, is the issue about the Summers Cove Marina management. It's on page 29. So we talked briefly about how Summers Cove Marina is getting $750,000 or so in the fiscal 2026 deficiency appropriation. And what's really happening here is that Chapter 444 of 2025 did transfer responsibility for Summers Cove Marina from the Commission to the Department of Natural Resources. But with that transfer, there was the understanding that there were certain invoices that had not been paid that just had to be paid, just written off, that would not be paid. So that's obviously not a good sign in terms of starting off the manager as something that's not, it sounds like very well managed. And then the question is also going forward whether the Department of Natural Resources is going to manage this in-house or have this done as by an outside contractor, which obviously has considerations in terms of how much spending it will be doing and how much the revenue will be coming as well. TLS recommends that DNR comment on why Summers Cove Marina was operating at a loss, what the implications are for DNR's management, obviously going forward. TLS also recommends that DNR comment whether it's decide whether the management the Summers Cove Marina internally or contracted out. On the bottom of page 29, there's an audit finding that's identified. The audit is noted at the back of this analysis. We're just highlighting one particular component here is the Mel Nolan Woodland Incentive Fund. So there was a public interest in finding out more about this particular issue that was just related to the Office of Legislative Audits. They did some research into it and found out that the controller was not actually submitting to DNR the full amount of funding that was supposed to be coming to it for this particular fund. It's around $430,000 or so that had not been transferred over the last couple of years. DNR did note in its audit finding that it would help to recover that money. DLS recommends that DNR comment on the status of recovering that funding that should have been transferred to the fund. On the bottom of page 29, climate pollution reduction grants funding clarified. So talked a little bit more about the climate pollution reduction grants in terms of the Maryland Department of the Environment and had some concerns about the transparency of that funding. Page 31, Exhibit 8 shows the big picture in terms of how that money is coming in now. So we have a better understanding of what it looks like. 5 years of funding. Coming in, and that money will be largely going to the Department of Natural Resources, $42.5 million for what's called the Atlantic Conservation Coalition. That's the leveraging of natural and public working lands for carbon dioxide sequestration. Then you're also seeing about $2.5 million at the bottom there for Maryland Department of the Environment for the Clean Corridor Coalition for really looking at the electric vehicles kind of charging infrastructure along the I-95 corridor. And there's also $71 million or so for the Maryland Department of Transportation for that particular part of the work. It's not broken out because we didn't get a breakdown by year. $133.1 million in total. DLS recommends that DNR comment on how it intends to use that $42.5 million over the 5-year period that is receiving through a sub-grant, sub-award from the Atlantic Conservation Coalition through MDE. And then finally, on page 32, and the Memorandum of Understanding on the Patuxent River Wildlands Trail Maintenance. This was funding restricted last year's budget until the submission of a Memorandum of Understanding. The Memorandum of Understanding was submitted regarding that purpose, and the restricted funding was released. Just wanted to note that here. On page 33, beginning on page 33, are 4 reports that were recommended on the Chesapeake Bay Overview Analysis that for administrative purposes are all being reflected here. The first is the summary of Chesapeake Bay restoration spending, historical and projected Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. Then on page 35, the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund annual reports, and finally the whole Watershed Act funding report. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Very comprehensive. Secretary Kurtz, welcome.
Good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. For the record, excuse me, Secretary Josh Kurtz, Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined by my Director of Fiscal and Administrative Services, Lauren Buckmaster, who can help me answer any technical questions. I had planned some opening remarks, but Mr. Gray's analysis was incredibly comprehensive, and many of the things we wanted to discuss was already covered in the analysis, so I'll jump right into the questions and to the recommendations, but I want to thank him for the analysis, as you saw, incredibly comprehensive. I wanted to start by, I'll just go in order of the questions. So question 1 on page 7 talks about our park reservation system and how it's changing access, but how it's making our park safer. And I think that's really important to understand here. Frankly, an unintended consequence of putting this program in place, it gave us a much better understanding of the number of people and cars in the parks at any given time. So when we're closing, we actually have a better understanding of how many people we should have seen leave. So actually something that was really impactful for us. We're looking this year to expand that from 5 to 15. So this pilot is growing, as Mr. Gray touched upon. Everywhere we had this program in place, our capacity closures were eliminated. And what we have seen in some of our surveys to people that use our parks is while they now know ahead of time if they're not going to get in. So as before, there might have been a chance people would sit on the side of the road. Greenbrier was a great example. People on the July 4th were showing up at 4:30 in the morning to queue up. Kids in their pajamas, waiting. Unfortunately, if they had to go to the bathroom, that was happening in people's yards. It was a very big concern. And so this completely eliminated that. And what we've heard is strong support for this. Actually, a lot of our localities have asked us to continue to expand this program. The other thing that we're seeing from this is lost revenue capture. So we charge for our parks all year round, but we only have someone at the booth during the busy months. And so we have what's called an honor box. The Park Service calls it the dishonor box because very, very often people do not pay. I had an incident where I was paying and someone yelled at me, "What are you doing? You insert language. It's free." It was not free. So this is also helping us capture some of the revenue that we're losing in those off-peak times. For question number 2 on page 11 related to the crab stock assessment, we're actually in the peer review phase of that right now because this is a new approach and we're setting new reference points. Historically, we've managed females based off reference points just on females. We're now looking for a multi-sex reference points approach because to Mr. Gray's point, what we have seen is the male population collapse and the juvenile population decrease while our females have held steady. Interesting in terms of crab life cycle, the females actually come up from Virginia. And so we've been working very closely with the new administration to answer some of those questions. But this is one of the most comprehensive pieces of science that the department has worked on in decades, and we're really proud of this. And so coming out of peer review, we'll have the results and the new reference points by May. That'll go to the industry blue crab industry work group, and then we'll work with them to set what are going to be our catch limits for the coming season. This is incredibly important, as we all know. We're not Maryland without the blue crab, and so we're really excited about this new science. I wanted to talk about the Deep Creek Lake pilot program, question 3 on page 14. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is an underwater grass mower. And so what we were seeing is concerns from the Deep Creek Lake users that the grass was starting to get into the engines. It was making it uncomfortable to swim. And so this is a piece of technology that's really popular and used in the Great Lakes region. And so we did a pilot assessment of this. And so what we're really looking to see was, is this effective in terms of bringing back, and do they stay back for the course of the year? And what impacts does it have on fisheries? So we set up 3 pilot areas based on depth to get a sense for how this worked at different depths in the lake. So we have just received all of that information, and it's going to go to the Deep Creek Lake Policy Review Board, which is kind of our oversight committee out there. We'll be sharing those, and then we'll work with them to come up with any regulatory changes we may need. And I do think, frankly, this is going to be a small business opportunity because people are going to, I think, want to start utilizing this if we see that it is ecologically sustainable. Moving to question number 4, the new parks. I'm excited about this, I'm going to be honest with you all. We've got 6 new parks, and the thing that I'm really very proud of the team with doing is we understand the budget situation that we're in, and so we evaluated each one of these parks in terms of their ability to either be self-sustaining or to contribute to the service. And so they're all very unique in their own ways. We opened the first one last weekend. It's Catoctin Furnace. This is it was a cemetery for enslaved individuals near Frederick, and incredible. We now are in contact with many of the descendants of those in the graveyard. And so we're working with the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. So really it's a shared management, which really takes a lot of the operating pressure off of us. They acquired the cemetery years ago using Maryland Historical Trust funds and are very good at what they do. We're basically providing additional marketing, additional signage, but working very well with that organization. So again, really very less concerned about operating budget there. With Tipquin Creek State Park, very exciting. This is a very unique fund setup that we have here. The individual who owned this property had invested millions of their own dollars in period accurate restoration of the property. It's an incredible cultural asset. This individual also then contributed funds from the acquisition to an endowment that's going to allow us to defray costs in the short term to be able to run this park as we build that longer term plan for the department and for the Park Service in terms of funding, and the foundation, which Mr. Gray touched on, which I'll discuss in a little bit, I think is going to be critical for that. Freedman's is part of an existing park that is funded strongly by agricultural leases, so funding is available for that one. Wills Mountain State Park, the state has owned since 1996. We're going to be opening this park to the public for the first time. It is considered one of the 3 best granite faces in the state of Maryland, and in the Mid-Atlantic, it's top 5. This is going to have a significant amount of draw from the rock climbing community. We've been working with them for about a year now. We planned on opening this park last year, but we found nesting peregrine falcons, and they're an endangered species. So what we did is we kind of pulled it back, and we took a year, actually worked with the climbing community to do some censusing, and then we're building the routes for climbing, and we're building the time of year that they can climb based around the peregrine falcon, so we don't have any endangered species issues. But again, I actually think that 1 year made people so hungry for this park, the demand is going to be very high. So we see the nominal entrance fee as being incredibly helpful for us in that regard. And then the last one is Holly Beach Farm Natural Resources Management Area. This has been operating as a very successful deer and duck hunting facility for us for the past 2 years. We're getting revenue that way. This park is entirely in the critical area and has no concrete. So we are not going to be adding to that. So this is going to be a very unique park in terms of utilizing existing infrastructure at Sandy Point to help people get to the park through boat access. The other thing about this facility is we're going to do it by reservation only. There's an incredible manor house there that we think could be a very good conference center. So we're looking at renting out that conference center for retreats and things like that as another source of income. Again, we're piloting at all of these sites new and different ways for us to manage parks. And so excited to do that for a year and come back and share what we learn with all of you and see where there's opportunities to grow that across the Park Service. Been in great conversation with the Gwynn Falls League and Partnership Park, with the city, with the advisory committee. There is a bill this year that does have funding, the $4 million, kind of the low end capital. So what that would do it would put capital into an existing building there that we could do some renovations to instead of having to build out a new park entrance and a new park visitor center. And then the 2.8 would be some staffing as well as some things like trail maintenance, some signage, things that really get the park usable. I will say, and we're on the record of this, the legislation does mandate that we cannot charge entrance fees. That would be significantly difficult for us in the long term in terms of incorporating that into our operating budget. So we have put forward an amendment to be able to charge entrance fees to the part of the park. So continuing to work closely with the city and the advisory group on that. And then the last one is the affiliated foundations. We've been having meetings with other states and the federal government and their affiliated foundations. And frankly, what we found is that setting up this foundation at the beginning is the most critical moment we're going to have. If we do not put the proper legal parameters around it in terms of how funds are brought in and how they're expended, it is very easy to lose the ability for this to contribute to what we want, which is long-term operating benefit. So we're working with the Attorney General, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is actually the way university systems have set up their foundations is a much more successful model than what we've seen some of the other states have done, and the federal Parks Foundation is a great example of that. That is a very, very, very mandated, close-knit relationship in terms of directing the funding and directing the build-out of the campaigns for fundraising. And I think a good example of that, actually on the Natural Resources Police side, we've drawn a lot of attention in our search and rescue dogs program, and we received a donation for Purina this year for them to cover the cost of feeding the dogs all year. The foundation will allow us to be proactive about that. Right now, we message and hope someone comes to us and offers us money. We'll be able to flip that paradigm, not only for NRP, but for all of our land units. I wanted to next go to question 5, which is on page 26, which is the conversation around long-term funding for PPRP. I think Mr. Gray really hit the nail on the head. We've seen a significant uptick in number of projects that are coming through the queue, whether they be large-scale solar, but the ones that are most taxing to this program are the linear transmission lines. At the end of the day, the responsibility of the Power Plant Research Program is to understand the technology and really the technical aspect of electricity. It is then to coordinate with our environmental review program and learn everything they need to do about impacts, endangered species, forestry, freshwater species impacts, recreational amenities, our protected lands, so how that impacts things like easements, state parks, wildlands, et cetera. And that requires a significant amount of legal help, and within this, there are a couple pins for the Attorney General or for the AAG to better support PPRP. At the end of the day, we have not had enough human horsepower to meet the demand, and this is going to allow us to expand this program. It also allows us to enter into agreements, very, very technically difficult electricity agreements with contractors. Frankly, we do not have that level of sophistication in-house, not a knock on PPRP in any way. But so we do need to contract out, and a good a percentage of the funds do go to that. Question number 6 on page 29 is the Summers Cove Marina. So one thing that we have seen over the history of Summers Cove is every year we were having a very difficult time with the actual figuring out how much they spent and how much they had purchased, how much they were paying in salary, what they charged for the slips. This was managed, is owned by the state of Maryland, has been owned by the state since the 90s, but since the early 2000s, this commission had been given full fiduciary responsibility. They were doing all of the hiring outside of state HR practices. They were doing all of the fiscal management outside of state fiscal controls. And so last year we worked with local elected officials, the advisory committee, or the Summers Cove Commission to really bring that within state government. We believe that we should be responsible for the finances. The bill does allow us to have control over the fee structures, which we did not have before. And at the same time that we're assuming control of the marina, we're also investing millions of dollars. This is going to be one of the largest capital projects we've done at the Department of Natural Resources. We have not invested significant money into that marina since it was purchased in the 90s, and frankly, it is in very bad shape. We're going to be closing a large percentage of that and shifting kind of how we lay it out as we repair the bulkhead. It is in critical failure, frankly, in many areas. Last year, we had to invest over $8 million just to maintain their electrical system. So this was very quickly becoming a difficult animal to kind of manage without having that fiduciary control. So we passed that legislation. Our plan for this year is to staff this and to run it for 1 year in-house while we evaluate opportunities for leasing. And we've also been speaking with our colleagues at Delaware, at the state of Delaware, DNREC, who have several marinas of similar size. So what we're looking at is not only their fee structures, but their management structures, how much staff they have, how they go about it. I think this is a unique site because there are many amenities that the state does not normally run. There's a museum, there's a pool, the standard amenities you would find in a private marina. One thing that the commission did do was it gave everybody a Smith Island cake when they arrived. Unfortunately, we're going to be discontinuing a full cake, maybe a slice. We're trying to figure out if we're going to be able to do that. Next is question number 7 on page 29, and that's in relation to our audit. And I wanted to touch on the Mel Nolan Woodlands Incentive Fund. What we have learned about that process is extremely complicated. So the way that the counties are eligible, first, SDAT had to re-clarify the difference between woodland and agriculture to ensure that their records were correct. Then if counties are enrolled in MALF, that doesn't mean they have MALF programs, it means they're actually enrolled with the foundation, they pay a different percentage in the transfer tax. And so what was happening was that was skewing the ability for SDAT and the comptroller to align their funding. And then what was happening was we were getting what came from the comptroller. So we've worked closely with both SDAT and the comptroller's office to better align processes in all 3 agencies. I will say though, in terms of the over $400,000 that are still out there, we have heard from the comptroller that we're most likely not going to be receiving that money, in large part because of the discrepancies that we're seeing along the way over many years. Being able to reconcile that is going to be very difficult. Continuing to work on that, but we're confident that the new processes in place are going to allow us to ensure that moving forward, the funds that we get are the funds that we should receive. And I think we learned a lot about how we're clarifying across the different percentages. The next one is question number 8 on page 30, which is the climate pollution reduction grant funding. This is going to be the largest single investment by the department in climate resilience, in climate mitigation, and frankly on the Eastern Shore in one project. The goals that we've put forward to the sub-awardees are 500 acres of afforestation, 1,000 acres of improved forest management, 600 acres of wetland restored, 400 acres of marshes protected by living shorelines, and over 100 coastal resilience management plans with private landowners. All of these are direct tick boxes to meeting the new Bay Agreement. And so we're really excited that we were able to align this federal funding. And what we were able to do is frankly lean into an existing network, the Delmarva Restoration and Conservation Network, which is local governments, nonprofits, academic organizations that for years have been receiving funds to do planning for climate resilience and did not have back-end funds for implementation. So what we did is we sat down with that network and we pushed that funding through what is existing pathways of projects that just didn't have the money to do it. And so we feel very confident that we'll be able to meet the deliverable of August 29th as the deadline, meet these incredible goals, and be able to layer, right? So these will be water quality goals, climate mitigation goals, and resilience goals, and there'll be things supported already by the community because they've been pre-planned and approved. Just touching on the recommended actions, we concur. We will be providing the report on the Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. I think one thing we would like to be able to do though is consolidate across those 4 pieces: historical spending, current spending, and looking into the future, and then also to incorporate the whole Watershed Act funding within that. So we concur again on providing that reporting. But I think it's important to see that is part of our broader restoration for the Chesapeake Bay and potentially could lead to changes in some of the underfund sources. So we would appreciate the ability to be able to put those together. So I think there's a consistent narrative as well as a consistent understanding of kind of how the finances work. With that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Senator Salling.
Thank you, and thank you for all the information. We talked just briefly just the other day, and I thank you for your time. But some of I guess my concerns is that we talked about, for instance, Hart Miller Island, and I appreciate the information you gave me about North Point Park. I'm really excited about that. But we don't see any officers there. We don't see any DNR, and they haven't been there for a while. We have Maryland Waterways, as you've talked with them, and Beck River, also restoration, the groups that are out there that clean up all the areas, have volunteers who do all this work. And they go out at Hart Miller at times, and there's just not anybody there at the visitor center. And we're kind of like concerned about that because we just want to make sure the maintaining and everything. How can we make sure that, first of all, we can get people out there? What's it going to take to hire some people out there in those areas? Because I know they multitask. They're not just there. Yep. There are like 3 or 4 other parks that I know where they go to because I visit them often. And we go out to the parks. I love going out to Fort Howard, to North Point, to Hart Miller Island. I mean, we go out there often and it's you got to get a boat to get out there, but I'll go out there. But How are we going to make sure that we can get some people out there?
Yes, and thank you for that question. I think Ranger Robin is someone many people knew very well. She went well above and beyond. That was a huge loss for the state when she left state service. We are planning to rehire that position. I think as we look, there are funds in our budget to cover vacancies in the Park Service, and that is one that is on our priority list. That is part of, as to your point, a broader portfolio of parks. So it still has the higher level management, but having that touch point, that person who is doing more of the day-to-day, that position is in our queue to be filled.
No, and I appreciate that. I know there's another new, smaller North Point area park. It's the historic park on Old North Point Road that we just now, a few years ago, we wanted that, and then so they take care of that as well. Just one more thing about it, Madam Chair. It's some of the, I guess, concerns with the locals that they would like to be more a part of the local, and you probably heard of the local wood first policy. We send letters to the governor seeing if we could use our local people for forestry work and things that they want to do. I mean, good example, they're using a lot of that for the Key Bridge to making sure we have areas where they do the rebuild and everything that they are doing. But I would like to see our local people and our local wood used instead of going out of state. And that's more jobs, that's more opportunity, that's economic movement, that's what we talk about a lot. Can we possibly have a conversation, or at the same time, how can we see that we can use more of our local people here?
Yeah, would love to have that conversation. I've been working with Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, and Department of Labor on that. We have an exciting, I think, announcement that's coming down the pike in a few weeks. I'm not allowed to share the details right yet, but it gets exactly at that. The opportunity for local wood and the opportunity to help them get into the procurement process. I think one thing we found in talking to especially our family-owned lumber mills, they're being in there and being able to be subcontracted out and being registered is a hurdle. Right. And so I think we had a good conversation with Commerce about that too. So I think some very exciting things coming down the pike. I'd be happy to talk more offline.
And if we could do more of that offline, I'd be really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions? I have one question, and I'm not going to put you on the spot right now, but one to, I guess, follow up on the DNR police recognition of them as first responders, the Maryland Rangers.
Okay.
Would like to, I had somebody from our county reach out to us about concerns about that. The Maryland Emergency Medical Responder and licensing, et cetera. So would love to follow up on that.
Yeah, happy to. I think, so I think those were for park rangers. And
right, not police.
And so we've been working with the union on emergency medical responders, and I think there's been some misunderstanding about emergency medical responders versus emergency medical technician. So happy to have that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lewis-Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Early in your presentation, you were talking about visitation and the fact that during the winter months, you don't necessarily have someone collecting admittance, and you had a rather unpleasant experience yourself. Do you have cameras there, or have you considered cameras? Cameras might be not only an incentive to make that contribution, but a security measure when you have fewer personnel around.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a great point. We've been having, actually, one of the great things about the pilot that we had was the entity that we work with brought their own capital in, and they had much more advanced stuff than we have, frankly, like cameras. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that we see the opportunity for, not just for safety, but also for like license plate recognition, ease of entrance, right? There's a lot more tools and technology out there. And I think this pilot really allowed us to lean into that and frankly learn from a company that does it all over the country. So I totally agree. I think that's very much coming.
Great, glad to hear that's on your horizon.
One other question about foundation. Mm-hmm. Do you already have potential donors out there that this is their thing, and you just need to set up the entity so that there would be this natural symbiosis?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways, there's a couple pieces to that. So one, we regularly are working with large corporations who ask us, oh, do you guys have anything like the Parks Foundation? We also have a Friends of group that does a fantastic job of fundraising as well. So I think there's already that understanding in that alleyway there, that avenue. The thing that we really frankly get a lot more of is like regular people coming to the parks and saying, hey, can I buy some merch to contribute? How can I contribute to the parks? And our answer tends to be, just keep coming and pay the entrance fee. But I think that's what the foundation also gives us the opportunity to do too, is provide a place for people who are inspired and also for us to work with larger corporations. And I think when we look at the National Parks Foundation and you look at their budget, they are driven by very large entities providing significant donations. I think when you look at the state of Maryland, the role we play in the boating world, there's very large entities in that space as well. So I think our approach would really be start with some of those larger institutional major donors that tend to donate in large chunks over time. And then if there's, provide opportunities for people to maybe buy some merch, things like that, that we currently don't have the capacity for.
You don't have merch?
We do not at this point in time, no. Some of our parks individually where we have very creative rangers have done that, and it does very well, but we don't have kind of a licensing agreement or anything like that.
Senator Rosapep.
What about bequests?
Do we get bequests? I think it's just cash donations. Yeah, I think just cash or in kind at this time, but that is a major fundraising source in the nonprofit foundation space.
Really? I mean, it just strikes me that it would fit well with parks and recreation.
I totally agree.
All right, thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Be really interested to hear about the harvester.
Yeah, yes. We'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. We will move on, and we are moving on to the Department of Public Safety and the Division of Pretrial Detention Services. And I'm sorry, we do this all the time. We have 3 public witnesses. I would like to call you up. Why don't you all come up at the same time? Tim Casey, Ann Jones, and Matt Stegman. And
Ann Jones is not here. She's in a Burke hearing across the hall. But
okay, you want to?
I was Anna Griffith.
Yep.
Okay.
But you are not signed up. But who are you with?
Forever Maryland.
Forever Maryland. Okay, come on up. We don't have you signed, but
okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I can take Ann's place.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Come on up.
My testimony is really brief, so I can go ahead and go first. Hi, everyone. Thanks for accommodating me. My name is Anna Mudd Griffith. I'm the Senior Policy Director for Potomac Conservancy. Today, however, I'm here on behalf of Forever Maryland. We are a coalition of nearly 30 land trusts located across the state of Maryland, located in every region within the state of Maryland. We're just here today to offer our strong support for the capital and operating budgets for the Department of Natural Resources. They've been a fantastic partner, both in the acquisition and the management of conservation easements within the state of Maryland. In particular, we are very much interested in preserving funding for program Open Space and our Rural Legacy program, which preserves large contiguous tracts of agricultural forest and ecologically valuable land. So with that, I'll just say we are in strong support of this budget. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Heddleman and committee members. I'm Tim Casey with the Friends of Maryland State Parks. We're an all-volunteer 501c3. We're dedicated to preserve, protect, enhance, and advocate for our state parks statewide. We support the 2027 Governor's operating budget and funding for the DNR and the Park Service. Please do not cut the funding. Only 2 comments. They both relate to the Great Maryland Outdoors Act and follow up there. Park Service staffing, the Friends fully support and encourage all DNR efforts to hire the 100 authorized positions that came out of the Great Maryland Outdoors Act in the passage of that in 2022. 5 were in engineering construction, which have been hired, and they're doing a great job in getting projects done. 95 were for rangers and maintenance staff across our 75 parks. Hiring has been slow, and this is problematic for the millions of visitors and the growth in parks. We believe every effort is being done to rectify this and move forward with those hires. The good news is that all the pins align from the Great Maryland Outdoors Act in the operating budget as presented by the governor. Of course, the last 3 years, only 7 of the remaining hires for Great Maryland Outdoors Act have been hired, but I do believe there's an acceleration and understanding of this at this point, and we hope that accelerates forward. The only other point I have is some very good news in the sense that one of those positions was hired, which is the volunteer coordinator. That was also specified by the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, and Friends are working collaboratively with the new statewide volunteer coordinator. There are thousands and thousands of state park volunteers across the state giving, in excess of hundreds of FTEs of work in the parks that augment the rangers and the staff and so forth. So we believe the strategic alignment is going to have great benefit in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony and your service. Appreciate it. That concludes the hearing for the Department of Natural Resources. Next up, the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services and the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services. Call up Josh Weinstock, our analyst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Josh Weinstock, and today I'll be presenting the fiscal 2027 budget analysis for the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services within DPSCS. The fiscal 2027 budget totals nearly $395 million, which is an increase of $1.4 million, or a little less than 1% from the 2026 working appropriation. I'll start with the performance analysis. In Baltimore City, all arrestees are processed at the Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center, or BCBIC. In the last decade, BCBIC has seen an overall decline in activity. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows the number of individuals processed and their rate of commitment. There were over 16,100 individuals processed in fiscal 2025, an increase of nearly 5% from the year before. Commitments also increased by about 5%, and the rate of commitment, or the share of processed individuals who are required by court order to be detained until their trial, stayed relatively level at 59%. In addition to pretrial detainees who are held in Baltimore City, DPDS holds some sentenced offenders in its custody. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the average daily population of sentenced offenders, local pretrial detainees, and federal pretrial detainees in Baltimore City over the last decade. From fiscal 24 to 25, local detainees decreased by 6.5%, while sentenced offenders held by DPDS increased by nearly 13%. Similar to what we saw with corrections, assaults increased again this year for pretrial detention. The estimated number of individual-on-individual assaults are shown on Exhibit 3 on page 6. There was a 10% increase from fiscal 24 to 25 in individual-on-individual assaults. This was driven by the Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center, BCBIC, and the Maryland Reception Diagnostic and Classification Center, MRDCC. The facility with the highest rate of assaults in fiscal 2025 was the Youth Detention Center, which only has about 115 offenders, but has an assault rate of 86 assaults per 100 offenders, which is nearly twice as high as any other facility. Over the past 5 years, there have been a 73% increase in the number of individual-on-individual assaults in pretrial facilities. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the estimated number of assaults on staff over the past decade. From fiscal 24 to 25, assaults on staff increased 3%, and over the past 5 years, assaults on staff have increased nearly 68%. Page 8 discusses the Pretrial Release Services Program, PRSP, which interviews, investigates, and presents recommendations to Baltimore City courts regarding the pretrial release of individuals accused of crimes. Exhibit 5 shows the number of supervision cases received by PRSP, which decreased by 7% from fiscal 24. Exhibit 5 also shows the number of pretrial investigations, which increased in fiscal 2025 by 11% from fiscal 24 and has increased by 37% over the last 5 years. Moving on to the budget, there are proposed deficiencies totaling nearly $18 million. The two largest deficiencies are $8.5 million for the cost to cover fiscal 2025 shortfalls in the inmate healthcare contract, and a net increase of $5.4 million due to a new federal contract to operate the Chesapeake Detention Facility, which will be discussed later in Issue 2. The fiscal 2027 allowance totals nearly $395 million, 64% of which supports 1,726 regular positions and 11 contractual positions. The inmate healthcare contract accounts for $107 million, or 27% of the allowance. The allowance is broken out by major spending areas on Exhibit 7 on page 10. The fiscal 27 allowance increases by $1 million overall, but after accounting for the proposed deficiency appropriation for medical costs associated with fiscal 25 shortfalls, the budget increases by approximately $10 million. The main driver of the change is personnel, mainly due to $8.6 million increase in employee and retiree health insurance and a $2 million increase in overtime costs. Partially offsetting the increase is a $4 million decrease in land improvement projects that ended in fiscal 2026. The other changes are broken out in Exhibit 8 on pages 11 and 12. On page 12, there's a discussion of the emergency closure of the Maryland Reception Diagnostic and Classification Center, or MRDCC, last December. In fiscal 2025, there was an average of 423 pretrial and incarcerated individuals in the facility who have now been transferred. However, the fiscal 2027 allowance still includes $64 million to operate the facility. The department should comment on its long-term plans for MRDCC, including its plans to resolve the facility's structural issues. DPSCS should also discuss how the other facilities are accommodating the transferred pretrial and incarcerated individuals, and how the department plans to realign MRDCC's budget to those other facilities. Moving on to personnel, on page 13, the fiscal 27 allowance transfers a net of 28 regular positions to other DPSCS divisions, driven by a decrease of 11 positions at Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center. DPSCS should comment on the reasons for the reduction in positions. In December 2025, DPDS had 105 vacancies, or a vacancy rate of about 6%. However, they are budgeted for nearly a 13% vacancy rate. In other words, they have 114 vacancies fewer than necessary to meet the budgeted turnover in fiscal 2027. This difference has the potential to produce a shortfall in fiscal 27. However, funding could be transferred from other DPSCS divisions. The first issue in today's analysis is about compliance with the Duval versus Moore consent decree. In 2015, the ACLU filed on behalf of Jerome Duval and other detainees to reopen a partial settlement agreement regarding conditions at the former Baltimore City Detention Center, which is now BIC, and the Metropolitan Transition Center, or MTC. The state agreed to overhaul the jail's healthcare system and make major improvements to the facilities, including accommodations for those with disabilities. The consent decree has been extended 4 times since 2020 and is now set to expire in June 2026. Appendix 2 on page 21 lists all the compliance provisions outlawed in the Duval versus Moore decree. In September 2018, a court-assigned monitor declared DPDS had reached substantial compliance in all areas of the physical plant requirements, and as of December 2025, DPDS and the plaintiffs agreed to terminate the mental health provisions of the decree after the department was deemed in compliance. Exhibit 10 on page 16 shows the remaining medical provisions of the consent decree. As of December 2025, DPDS was in substantial compliance with 5 of those provisions, partial compliance with 22 provisions, and non-compliant with 6 provisions. Among the active medical provisions that are still remaining, there has been little improvement. From October 2023 to December 2025, only 1 provision improved from non-compliance to partial compliance, and no provisions moved from partial compliance to substantial compliance. DPSCS should discuss the steps taken to achieve greater compliance with the medical provisions of Duval versus Moore and its plans to achieve compliance by June 2026. DLS determined the report the department submitted on the Duval versus Moore consent decree to be in compliance with the budget language and recommends the release of $100,000 in fiscal 26 general funds. DLS will process a letter to this effect if no objections are raised by the committees. DLS also recommends adding language that restricts $100,000 in fiscal 27 general funds pending a report on DPSCS's strategy to to reach full compliance with Duval versus Moore by June 2026. The recommendation appears on page 19. The second issue in the analysis discusses DPSCS's new contract with the U.S. Marshal Service for the Chesapeake Detention Facility, or CDF. CDF is a maximum security facility for federal pretrial detainees that DPSCS has operated on behalf of the U.S. Marshal Service. The previous contract ran from September 2010 to August 2025 and was adjusted every 2 years based on inflation. Exhibit 11 on page 17 shows the amount of federal funds and general funds needed to operate CDF since fiscal 2021. The prior contract was not based on the actual costs paid by the state, which led to general funds being used to operate the facility, especially in fiscal 24 and 25. DPSCS agreed to a 7-year contract from November 2025 to October 2032, requiring the department to provide a minimum of 384 beds for federal detainees. From fiscal 2028 to 32, the contract increases each fiscal year by an average of 4%. However, from fiscal 2016 to 2025, the actual cost to operate the facility increased by an average of about 8% a year. The department should discuss the contract with the U.S. Marshal Service, including a justification for why the contract was renewed. Additionally, DPSCS should discuss how the new contract reduces the need for general funds. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, Madam Secretary Scruggs, please come up.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Carolyn Scruggs. I am the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Toyin Bakari, our Deputy Secretary of Administration, and Kimberly Begg, Commissioner for the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services. As always, we would like to thank Mr. Weinstock for his hard work on this analysis, and to also thank our DBM analyst, Ms. Christina Jorge Chuyon, for her dedication to us and guiding us through this budget process. You have my written testimony before you addressing these issues, so I would just like to take a few moments to expand upon a few items. The first item I do want to address was stated by Mr. Weinstein related to the assaults and YDC, our Youth Detention Center, having the highest number. YDC's assaults were only 4% last year compared to BC BIC, which had the 11% higher assault rate there. So we do want to get that corrected. I also do want to take a moment to expand upon Duval versus Moore. If you are not familiar with Duval versus Moore, this case started in 1976. It started with the conditions of confinement of the Baltimore City Detention Center. I am very proud to sit here before you and say that as of December the 10th, 2025, the department was found in compliance for mental health for Duval. After 50 years, the men and women of this department have worked tirelessly to ensure that we are now in compliance, and we continue to work to progress to make sure that we are compliant with the medical portion of it. There is a letter dated February 27th from our attorneys that does state that we are in compliance with medical, but we have to go through 2 cycles to show that we are compliant, and then we will be asking for termination of that portion of the contract as well, thus removing us from the Duval decree after 50 years. The department has made significant changes to the scope and to the scale of our medical and mental health care provided by our contractors for incarcerated individuals. Some of the things that we've done in that contract is we have increased the required professional staff available on site in our facilities. The Division of Pretrial Detention and Services has correctional officers who are now trained as medical liaisons within our facilities, and they assist to coordinate care between custody and our contracted medical staff. The department has also engaged in upgrades to our electronic patient health record system to support quality documentation and care delivery. These upgrades have improved interoperability between our health management system, our medication system, and our offender case management, which is our custody record. Regarding medical compliance, as we continue to work through these 2 cycles with the monitor and report and demonstrate ongoing substantial compliance with the settlement agreement, we have also specifically looked at areas such as intake screening, intake urgent referrals, medical plan of care, accommodations for plaintiffs and with disabilities, and medical records. The department continuously evaluates our services and to ensure delivery of high-quality medical care to the department. And we have done a lot to make progress and achieve where we are today. The dedicated staff work hard to ensure that we are always safe and that our incarcerated individuals are safe as well. Lastly, I want to acknowledge the men and women who worked tirelessly and went above and beyond to ensure a smooth transition of depopulating MRDCC. We did this in conjunction with a review by the Office of the Attorney General. Their dedicated work ensured that we immediately and safely depopulated 393 incarcerated individuals, and they were transferred to nearby facilities. Moving forward, we will evaluate whether to repair or permanently decommission MRDCC based on safety, costs, and the system-wide needs of our 18 facilities. DPSCS is working with DGS, and we are proactively reviewing all other state correctional facilities to identify existing deficiencies and to implement both short-term and long-term viable solutions. I thank you for your time, and we are here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Sally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all the information. You were saying how the individual assaults were going down, but it seemed like from the numbers they have gone up, and also the problems that we're having, it looks like the assaults on the staff. What kind of protective measures maybe are you putting in place to making sure that the staff are protected when somebody would want to assault them, maybe get a second thought before they want to do something like that? But we see it's an ongoing problem. Is there anything more that we need to do, that you need to do? But we're working together to make sure that this doesn't continue and it doesn't continue to, mount up and the numbers go up.
So the staff are trained. They're trained in confrontational avoidance. They are trained in de-escalation tactics. And we have gone back to reinforce that training with the staff because that is what is so very important. Oftentimes, just nature as a human being, they tend to react. And they can't always react because then it causes a reaction from that incarcerated individual. So we are doing more training and roll call. They're in the in-service training that they get annually. They are going over those de-escalation tactics as well as defense tactics in case you have to take care of yourself. Sure. Again, I stress to you, we have a more aggressive population that we are managing right now. And it is that population that we are cleaning the streets with to make our streets safer, but yet confining them behind the walls. So they are going to be more aggressive. They just are by nature because of the offense that they're in there for. They're in there for assaults on other persons.
And I understand that. I just think if there's something more that we can do, if there's something we can help out, there's something that maybe one place is doing compared to maybe another place to help and assist, I think it would be good to protect your staff, but also protect the individuals who are in there from other individuals. I know there's got to be some serious problems in that area, and I know you would like to remedy that. You like to take care of those problems, I'm sure. But if there's more that we could do or something else we just can assist in some way, it would be a help. Also, how are you working on and continue to working on to making sure the overtime and the staff and how they're doing? Because I know it's been an ongoing problem, and we hear this, and we want to make sure, again, that they're not working every day or double. It's troubling. It's unsafe. How can we make sure that? Because I know we've been working on that for a period of time now. Maybe, can you tell us, is there any success going on right now?
So I can tell you that we are aggressively monitoring overtime. We are managing it. The depopulation of MRDCC within Division of Pretrial Detention helped us tremendously because we were able to then take some 200 or so of our staff and deploy them to other facilities right there in the region. So that has helped reduce overtime. We did last pay period. We did see a decrease in over 3,000 hours of overtime. So I have personally become more involved and aggressively encouraging my commissioners to make sure that they are watching overtime. One of the projects that I just recently placed upon them was to look at all their special assignment posts and all those posts really needed. Or do they need to replace a post that they already have with this post because they find themselves closing that post? We've also talked about how we manage overtime, especially when it comes to hospital runs, utilizing staff that are scheduled for that shift, that are weapons qualified to go out on those hospital runs, and not instead of hiring for a hospital run to pay overtime. And that gives you the flexibility if you do have to hire someone in the facility and things are quiet in the facilities, or it is a post that you can close or collapse, you reduce the amount of overtime that's needed. So we are constantly looking at it. We are constantly coming together as a team just to look at ways that we can continue to reduce it.
And if I could, just one more thing, Madam Chair. When we had the opportunity to go and check one of the Alan Jessup, I saw some of the had work release, and I want to know how well that's going as well.
We always encourage other community partners to join us to become part of that work release population, because we do have a population, especially at Dorsey Run right now, that we are still seeking to find some employment for. They are eligible for work release, but we don't have employers for them. So we are constantly trying to do that, but we do have a long list of employers that engage with us as well.
That's good. All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Roosevelt.
Yeah, could you expand a little bit on that in terms of folks who are employment ready and you don't have employers for?
So I just want to make sure everybody's clear. That is the Division of Corrections, not Division of Pretrial Detention and Services. So these are individuals, correct, that have are nearing completion of their time, right, and they are now eligible for work release, right, which means they can come out, go to work, and come back. Right. Typically in the Jessup region is where you're going to find they are at your pre-release and minimum facilities. In Jessup, we have large companies such as Giant that will employ them at the Giant warehouse down there, and we'll do that. On the Eastern Shore, we have Purdue. Purdue actually comes and picks them up from the annex and takes and brings them back once their day is complete. They actually work on the line there. I've been there to see it when they're cleaning the chicken and preparing them for come out to the stores for you to purchase.
Approximately how many people do you have who are ready to work but you don't have employment slots for?
I'll have to get you that number because I don't want to give you an incorrect number. But I will tell you that on the Eastern Shore, Purdue takes up to 100 of our incarcerated individuals for work.
The other thing I'd be interested in how many employers do you have that do take folks who are ready to come out?
Sure, and I don't know. I know my former Dave, you want to come up? My current deputy secretary, who was actually a former warden over the pre-release system, I'm sure he can shed some light on you about employers, because that's what he did.
Oh, that's great. And it can be brief for now and get us some other data, but I'm just trying to get an impression.
Sure, thank you, sir, and appreciate that question. For the record, my name is David Green. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Operations for the Department of Public Safety. And yes, as Madam Secretary mentioned, I was formerly the Director of Case Management for the state and the Warden for the men's pre-release system. So we had work release operations at multiple facilities, as she mentioned, one on the Eastern Shore at the ECI Annex, one in Jessup, one in Hagerstown, one in Baltimore City. The estimates at the time that I held that position were approximately 50 to 55 men who were going out every day to work full-time jobs in the Jessup region alone, approximately 20 to 30 at the Baltimore City Correctional Center, and we would have to pull those numbers for you for the outlying units. But anywhere from 12 to 15 active private employers in each region at any one time, and we can certainly provide that list to you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I have a question. I need to go back to the Chesapeake Detention Facility. So I'm confused about, it looks like from this analysis that we are paying more than we should, perhaps, paying more out of general funds for a federal government facility. I understand we have some state folks there, but is this a population that is different from people who are incarcerated in other of our institutions? If so, why are they there? And could they be elsewhere? One. Two, what is the state of the, I don't know, the physical state of the detention facility? And I understand this is a federal program that has been operational, but what happens if it weren't there? What would the federal government do?
Great question. So I will, I'll give you the operational side, and then I'll let our DSA give you the financial component of the new contract. Operationally, we are allowing 385 beds within that facility to be utilized for U.S. Marshal. These are federal pretrial detainees that have to go to court in downtown Baltimore. When I met with the marshals, originally when I came on as secretary, one of their concerns was that they were having to house individuals in West Virginia, Ohio, and other states that had to have court right here in downtown Baltimore. And they wanted a few more beds. But if you notice, they actually have less, because when they originally started this contract, they had 500 beds. Because we still had a need in that facility to house some of our pretrial detainees. Basically, it's the old Supermax that is now Supermax up in Cumberland. And we needed that type of environment because they are cells, they're not dormitory environments. We actually utilized the rest of it in order to house our pretrial detainees that are Baltimore City arrestees. So there is a combination of both federal as well as Baltimore City detainees in that building. With the contract, I'll let Toyin tell you how the contract works.
Yes, thank you for the question. So under the previous contract, the pay structure wasn't obviously advantageous to the state. And that's why we ended up having to pay more in general funds towards the tail end of the contract in 2024, FY 24 and 25. However, we have since, renegotiated a new contract that is definitely more advantageous, better, and would work better for the state of Maryland. And we do anticipate that the cost, that the revenue that we're going to be receiving in federal funds to operate CDF will definitely offset the cost of running, or at least keeping those federal detainees within our custody. So that was the reason why, in FY 24 and 25, we ended up having to pay a bit more in general funds to operate the facilities versus how it's gonna be for the next 7 years under the new contract.
So just so I get clarification, you don't anticipate needing general fund revenue to be able to?
No, we do have to, because right now, like the secretary said, we had previously under the old contract, we provided 500 beds. Now we are providing 384 beds for the federal detainees, and we still have our own, we still have state detainees on site, so we still have to provide some portion of federal general funds for, for our portion of the detainees that we're holding on to. But you definitely need general funds, but not as much as it was in FY 24-25.
So I understand that, and this is in Cumberland, right?
No, it's in Baltimore.
It's in Baltimore, the old Supermax in Baltimore. Yes. Okay, so I guess I still don't understand how the population of Maryland folks, as distinct from federal folks, why are they being held there and not other places? Or is that a different population, or these people?
So these are Baltimore City arrestees that are being housed there. They haven't been sentenced, they're waiting to go to court, as well as federal arrestees.
Right.
That may be, they may have had in Maryland, they may have in West Virginia. So the federal portion is just basically federal housing. The rest of the housing is Baltimore City Police made the arrest, Baltimore City Sheriff, or they were arrested by some entity that is a commissioned law enforcement agency in Baltimore City.
So are all Baltimore City arrestees being held pretrial there?
Not all. They initially come through BC BIC,
Right.
Central Booking.
Right.
if their housing deems that they need to be in a cell environment, because a lot of BC BIC has dormitory, then CDF is the location that has cells. MTC is also, has cells. MTC is also dormitory environment. So those are where you're gonna put your more egregious individuals, honestly.
In the
At
cells?
CDF, yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I was getting at.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is potentially a more, people who've been accused of more violent,
More violent, maximum, where they need maximum
where they
security.
need to be by themselves.
Yes.
Okay, that is very helpful. And can you tell me a little bit about the pretrial services? I'd like to dig into that just a little bit. Do you use risk assessments? I mean, how are you advising courts for those people who are pretrial? And then the kind of pretrial supervision. So are these folks on home monitoring that you are overseeing?
So I will share with you as much as I know and get you the rest from my historical knowledge and having worked down there for years. It is ordered by the court. So we have within Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center, when they go through the process of getting their initial appearance, they're also seen by a pretrial investigator. So when they go to court, both the court commissioner's recommendation as well as the public defender and the pretrial investigator's recommendation for bail review is considered by the judge. The judge at that time can release them to pretrial supervision. And that's what this division does. They don't release all of them, though, to our pretrial supervision, because as you know, there are private home entities that they can release them
That's
to
where I'm
as
going.
well. Yes, correct. So within our pretrial, we actually we're fortunate enough we were able to hire one of the public defender attorneys that is now overseeing that division. She is a director for pretrial and she's not with us today. So as far as their risk assessments and what they're actually using, I'll be happy to get that information from her for you.
Okay, so because my understanding has always been that Baltimore's pretrial is totally, pretrial monitoring is totally done by private entities.
No.
And you're saying that you also take some percentage of them and have your own supervision. So do you own your own equipment?
Yes.
And that is done in Baltimore, okay.
That is done, and we can get you those numbers if you like. But that is directed to us by the court.
Right, so you're doing all of the city pretrial?
No,
You're not.
because the judge has the authority.
No, I mean, advising, not necessarily overseeing, monitoring.
Correct, we're not monitoring everyone in Baltimore City on
understand that.
pretrial.
Right.
But we do at bail review, there is a recommendation that comes from pretrial that is presented.
So
to
you're
the
doing
judge.
all the recommendations, and then you take, according to what the court says, you're taking some of them, and then if they are permitted to have community, be released in the community and have monitoring, you are taking some and you're referring some to
So what happens is
private.
So what happens is when the court issues a release and says that this individual is released on their own recognizance or released on bail, on the release document, there are conditions of release. One of the conditions of release will specifically say that they are to report to Baltimore City's Division of Pretrial Detention and Services. Or it'll say they are to report to 123 private. The court dictates where they go. We don't get to pick and choose. But whoever is on the release document under that condition of release, those are then become the clients of our unit that we oversee.
So it's up to the court to determine whether they get private or you home monitor.
Absolutely.
But most of them are going private.
I need to get those numbers for you because I will have to balance and see what those numbers are.
Okay, because that's how it's always been represented to me.
Yeah, I'll check those numbers for you.
Okay, okay. Anybody have any other questions? Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank
you. We have one person who would like to testify, and that is Laquan Alston.
Good afternoon, how you doing? All right, good afternoon. My name is Laquan Alston, and I'm a proud Executive Vice President of ASME Local 3661. I'm a pretrial investigator working for the Division of Pretrial Release Services, and I currently work at the Baltimore City Intake Center. As a pretrial investigator, I work in the bail review unit, where I gather all pertinent information regarding detainees' history to provide it to the court along with a recommendation so the court is able to make an informed decision regarding the detainee's bail status. Despite the importance and significance of our role, we are often forgotten, and our agency fails to dedicate the resources which could help us move towards a more innovative world. We still are burdened with sharing desktops in the courtroom, which don't allow us to easily individually access the information we need from the courtroom. Information that is the difference between a judge releasing a criminal back into our communities. If we are provided an adequate budget, we will be granted resources like tablets and laptops to have the flexibility we need. We need tablets and laptops to work from essentially anywhere. With the seriousness and location of our work, security must be improved. Specifically, at central booking, staff assaults have risen 68% since fiscal year 2021. In the courtroom, incarcerated individuals are cuffed. Once the session ends, they are taken in the hallway where they are uncuffed. More times than often, we are in close proximity with the same individuals that we gave a judge a recommendation for. We are the least trained unit that encounter the same risk as others in the same facility as us. Case managers, parole and probation, court commissioners, dietary staff, correctional staff, and even chaplains have sponsored trainings that give access to more up-to-date and uniform systems for incarcerated individuals. Pretrial investigation has risen 37% in the past 5 years, but we have failed to retain staff. The turnover rate is out of control without competitive pay. The vacancy rate has gone down 7%, but the majority of the staff has less than a year. We need competitive pay to attract people and retain them. And if you guys can help us with any resources and tools, we'll be grateful.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I have a question. What kind of training do you feel like you need that you're not getting?
That's something that we, as like a group, have to go over because we don't get any training at all. The only training that we get is the field training just to do the job. But we work inside of a facility. So it's other things that come with it, knowing what's going on in jail as far as what's being said on the radio, the different type of movements that's going on. It's like Ms. Secretary said, there are trainings that are given to like correctional staff as far as de-escalation and things of that nature, and us dealing with individuals that come in there intoxicated on drugs, have mental disabilities. We don't have those trainings, and those are some things that we do need.
That's helpful. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. All right. I think that concludes the hearing. And that concludes our subcommittee today. Thank you very much.